What was so terrible that even the stars trembled, and the breath of Eden went still? What storm was born beyond the sky, before the garden, before the clay of man had dried, when angels turned their swords, not against darkness, but against each other? What light was shattered so violently that even heaven remembers it in silence? There was a moment before time remembered time, when the sky itself had no shadow and all was song. A stillness, deeper than oceans yet to be imagined. A radiance that filled every corner of the unseen, where the thrones burned with holiness and the seraphim wept joy like rivers. It was there, in the hidden crown of the Most High, that one was fashioned from the brilliance of the morning. Lucifer, son of the dawn, guardian of secrets, arrayed in stones older than mountains, his voice a symphony of the first breath. He walked among the coals of glory, and even silence bowed in reverence to his name. But light that begins in love can end in longing, and longing, when twisted, births a hunger no praise can ever fill. The watchers still whisper of the hour the song turned. The hour pride dressed itself in beauty, when one dared to rise, not in worship, but in war. Not against man nor beast, but against the throne itself. And then the silence broke, a trumpet that had never been heard, a wind that tore the tapestry of peace, and Michael, the sword of God, rose like the storm heaven had never known. His eyes were judgment, his wings thunder, and the war that followed was not of stars and fire, but of eternity itself. If your spirit feels this calling, walk with us now. Stay close. This was meant for you to hear. Let the dream remember itself, and the soul return. In the beginning, there was not beginning. There was no time yet to cradle the dawn, no breath yet drawn by creature or king. There was only the infinite, the Holy One, beyond all names, whose presence was light without shape, fire without heat, voice without sound. And within that endless stillness, like a womb untouched by sorrow, the first note trembled, a note not made, but born, not spoken, but unveiled. And all creation waited for the sound. And the light sang. It sang not in melody, but in meaning. A sound that filled the nothing with knowing. A sound that was not heard, but understood by atoms that had yet to form, by stars not yet placed, by spirits not yet spoken into being. The light sang of glory, of purpose, of presence. It rippled like gold across the face of eternity, and the sea of the unseen opened. And from the center of that sea there emerged not land nor form, but order. Thrones of flame formed around the breath of the Most High. Wheels within wheels, spinning with reverence. Living creatures with faces like prophecy. Seraphim wrapped in lightning and awe. Each breathed for one reason, to behold. And among them, the One. The Chosen, the anointed cherub, Lucifer. His name means morning. His name means bearer of light. His name means the one who walked where others knelt. He was not yet fallen. He was not yet shadowed. He was the glory of the dawn itself, second only to the holy flame. His wings spread like rivers of sapphire, and upon his chest were stones that reflected the mind of God. Sardius, topaz, diamond, emerald, sapphire, carbuncle, each one a truth he carried within. He did not merely sing, he was the song. Every note of heaven's breath moved through him, and the cosmos echoed with his praise. Lucifer did not bow before God, he moved with him. As a prince walks with a king, not in equality, but in favor. He was the covering one, the high cherub who guarded the mysteries, who walked on the stones of fire that bordered the throne. The scrolls of Ezekiel whispered of this, saying, "You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God." And even this was not all. For beyond form, beyond splendor, beyond song, Lucifer belonged. Not to a place, nor to power, but to the center of the divine design. He did not question his place. He did not reach beyond his glory. Not yet. He looked upon the lesser thrones with kindness. He taught the stars their rhythm. He blessed the rising of the firmaments, the weaving of waters, the shaping of winds. He rejoiced when Gabriel was formed, when Uriel first breathed, when Raphael bore healing in his wings. He stood with Michael, as brothers do not by blood, but by mission. And all the heavens sang in harmony. Nothing was broken. No eye had yet wept. But even in this sea of light, a silence lingered. A silence that asked a question. Not aloud, not in rebellion, but like a seed in the marrow of glory. It asked, "Is this all?" And the question waited. But heaven did not answer. Heaven only sang, for time had not yet tasted sorrow, and the silence was not yet a wound, not yet. The days of heaven are not days as mortals know them. They do not pass in measure or fade with dusk. They unfold like breath from the divine, layered, eternal, unfolding yet never-ending. And in those timeless ages, the light danced. The angelic hosts moved in circles of praise, in spirals of fire, in processions that glowed with unspeakable joy. The firmaments above the firmaments trembled not with violence, but with adoration. There was no shadow there, no memory of wrong, no concept of fall. Lucifer stood at the center of it all, the jeweled fire, the morning crowned in music. His voice led the choirs, and when he lifted his arms, stars harmonized. When he moved, galaxies spun in reverence. He did not command, he inspired. He did not control, he illumined. His beauty was not mere appearance, it was truth, made visible. The angels did not envy him, for envy had no tongue. There was only astonishment and gratitude and the quiet joy of being what they were, echoes of the One. But the silence beneath Lucifer's glory began to hum. Faint at first, like a harp string touched by a shadow. It was not evil, it was not rebellion. It was curiosity, raw, innocent, until it wasn't. He watched the way light gathered around the throne, and how all wings bent in worship. He noticed the symmetry of divine will and wondered if there could be another pattern, a beauty of his own making. He did not speak this, not yet, but the wondering grew roots. He began to reflect on his own form, not as a mirror of the holy, but as a thing to behold. What once humbled him now began to charm him. He observed the emerald blaze of his covering and said within himself, "This, too, is beautiful. This, too, is power." His footsteps upon the fiery stones grew slower, as if to feel the heat not in service but in ownership, and heaven, though eternal, began to shift. Gabriel saw it first, the flicker behind the eyes, a gaze that no longer looked only upward. Raphael felt it in the tones, a slight delay in the song, a tremor of dissonance. Uriel, keeper of wisdom, heard the absence of praise in certain moments, like a bird missing from morning. But it was Michael who sensed it deepest, not because he doubted Lucifer, but because his soul ached when joy began to falter. Still, none accused, for heaven does not rush to judgment. The throne waits, always. Lucifer's following did not begin with a cry, nor a cause, but with wonder. He spoke to others as poets do, gently, curiously, beautifully. "Is not the throne beautiful?" he asked. "And are we not its light?" The angels nodded. What if we too bore a fire of our own, not to take, but to add? He never said rebellion. He never spoke of dominion, only of light, of rising, of becoming. And so the first tremors of division were sown not through war, but through invitation, not to hate, but to create. The deception was not in the words, but in the silence beneath them. Lucifer began to gather songs of his own choirs that mirrored heaven's, but carried his flavor, subtle shifts in tone, slight alterations in form. Angels who once bowed with a single voice now listened to another rhythm, not in defiance, in beauty. They did not know they were falling. For the path to darkness never begins in darkness. It begins in admiration of one's own light. And the throne still waited. For the highest does not fear time. He does not answer pride with panic. He lets the heart unfold. For choice is the truest glory. Lucifer, now glowing with a fire of his own making, looked out across the sea of glass and felt something new, a divide. Not yet between him and God, no, not openly, but between himself and the others. He no longer saw himself as part of the song. He saw himself as the origin of one. And in that moment, the light within him began to turn not dim, but curve. Curved light still shines, but it no longer leads. Michael came to him once, alone, beneath the vault of sapphire winds. "You have changed," he said. Lucifer turned, his face soft but distant. "So has the sky." Michael's voice was sorrow, not accusation. "The sky is the same, but your eyes see differently." Lucifer smiled, a smile with both warmth and wound. "Perhaps I see deeper." Michael looked away, wings heavy. "Perhaps you see only yourself." The silence that followed was holy. It echoed with a sorrow that had no words. And then they parted. One walked back toward fire, the other toward shadow, and still the heavens waited. Lucifer did not fall like a rock from the sky. He rose first, lifted not by holiness, but by the illusion of his own brilliance. It was ascent that became descent, and the higher he climbed in his image of self, the further he drifted from the light that birthed him. He still bore beauty, but it no longer pointed to the throne. It circled inward, like a mirror seeking only its own reflection. And the hosts who once beheld him in awe, now beheld him with wonder, and then with worry. But he did not rage, not yet. His rebellion was not thunder. It was a whisper, a beckoning, a call dressed in silk. He did not say, "Let us rise above God." He said, "Let us rise with him." He did not offer destruction. He offered a vision, a kingdom of his own design, where freedom meant becoming more, not bowing forever. His charisma wrapped the blade of pride in honey, and so many drank it gladly. 1/3 of the stars turned their eyes toward him, not in hatred, in hope. And it was then, only then, that the silence in heaven cracked, not with wrath, not with judgment, but with the sound of a name that had always been a question: Michael. It does not mean victor or mighty. It is a cry. Who is like God? It is not a statement. It is a sword drawn not in anger, but in truth. Michael stood upon the high place, wings wide, flame shimmering across the arc of his being. The winds bent around him, for he was the breath of justice in the courts of glory. His presence did not roar, it revealed, and when he spoke, the song paused. "Lucifer," he said, "not as an enemy, but as a brother, remembering the garden of joy. You carry fire that was never yours." Lucifer, radiant still, stepped forward. "I am what I was made to be." Michael's gaze did not waver. "You were made to reflect. Now you seek to become. And is that not divine?" Lucifer's voice was velvet, threaded with lightning. "No," said Michael, "it is hunger." Lucifer turned then, slowly, letting the gathered angels see the fire around him. "Then let the hungry rise. Let those who dare feel the sun in their chest stand with me. Let us make more than worship. Let us make ourselves." And many rose. The stars dimmed. The winds screamed. The wheels within wheels began to tremble. And the throne, the unseen flame, moved. Not in fear, not in struggle, but in finality. The war did not begin with a trumpet. It began with a silence that ended. And in that ending, all things shook. Michael lifted his sword, not forged by hand, but by holy will. It burned not with heat, but with the memory of justice. And Lucifer once the morning raised his wings, which now shimmered not with Eden's light, but with the fire stolen from it. The host split, heaven tore, the first light had sung, now it would shatter. The battle would not be for dominion, it would be for truth, for the soul of light itself, for whether glory belonged to the giver or could be taken by the gifted. The war in heaven had begun, but as the storm gathered, as fire and wind prepared to clash, there remained for the last time a stillness, a moment before the fall, a breath before the blade, a final glimpse of what was, before it was lost forever. The garden behind the veil, the unbroken praise, the brotherhood of wings, the smile before sorrow. And in that moment, known only to heaven and never again to be seen, Lucifer looked back. Not in regret, but in memory. He would never see it again. And still the heavens waited. It is not loud. There is a moment in every soul when reflection ceases to be gratitude and becomes desire. It is not loud. It is not violent. It is a soft folding of light inward, a turning of the gaze from the giver to the gift. And in that turning, a mirror is born. Not the kind that reveals, but the kind that seduces, the kind that does not show truth, but promise. Lucifer looked into that mirror. He saw not the one who breathed stars into being. He saw himself, the shine of sapphire wings, the glow of stone and gold, wrapped in living fire. The music that once belonged to praise now played only his name. He studied himself as one studies a secret, not in worship, but in longing. Not as a servant, but as a god waiting to awaken. Pride does not scream at first. It whispers in words shaped like beauty. It wears the perfume of potential. And for Lucifer, pride arrived not as rebellion, but as revelation. He had not been created to rule, and yet he felt rule in his bones. He had not been told to rise, yet the sky seemed to bend for his ascent. He had not been crowned, yet angels sang as if he wore one. And so he wondered, in silence that tasted like incense, what if I am more? The thought lingered like perfume on a garment. Not yet a sin, not yet a fall, just a shimmer of self. He began to speak less in chorus and more in verse. His songs no longer echoed, they declared, and the angels, hungry for awe, listened, not because they doubted God, but because they marveled at the one who once stood nearest to him. Lucifer moved among the hosts with the grace of a king not yet crowned. He cloaked himself in mystery, unveiling just enough to stir wonder. He painted visions in the minds of his followers, dreams of a kingdom where praise would rise to many thrones, not just one. A garden of light, he whispered to them, not to replace the throne, but to share in its fire, a place where we are not only created, but creators. They did not know they were falling. They thought they were rising. Pride often wears the mask of ascension, and still heaven waited. Michael watched from afar. His heart did not burn with fury, it ached with memory. He remembered the harmony that once filled Lucifer's voice. He remembered laughter beside the stones of fire. He remembered wings that wrapped in blessing. But now there was distance, a chasm not of space, but of intent. Lucifer no longer walked the halls of heaven. He drifted through them like a shadow made of stars. His followers grew bold. They sang songs that did not rise to the throne, but circled back to their own lips. They built patterns of beauty that did not mirror heaven, but imitated it. Their gatherings became altars of self. Their worship became want. The mirror had grown. It now reflected not only Lucifer, but those who chose to follow his gaze. And still he said nothing of war. He still called God holy. He still bowed when others watched. He still lifted his eyes when the throne passed. But in the chambers of his heart, a kingdom was taking shape. It was shaped like light, but it was hollow, and hollow light hungers for glory. the Most High, who sees all yet forces none, let it unfold. For love without freedom is not love at all. He did not strike, he did not silence, he waited, and in that waiting the mirror deepened. Lucifer stood once more before the sea of glass, the holy place where stars were born, where time was measured in beauty, not decay. And for the first time, he saw himself not as servant, not as son, but as rival. And it thrilled him. He who once knelt in reverence now measured the throne with his eyes. He who once echoed praise now questioned why there must be only one. And the mirror whispered, "Why not you?" Lucifer smiled, and somewhere, far beneath the crystal sea, the first tear fell. Pride is not born in fury, it is born in fascination, a slow fire that starts as warmth and ends as consumption. Lucifer did not burn with wrath, he shimmered with wonder at himself. The brilliance that once danced through him now pooled within him like a lake of stolen Sunday. And the more he drank of his own reflection, the more heaven began to blur, not in substance, but in center. He no longer stood facing the throne, he stood beside it, then just beyond it, then in its shadow. He had not declared his kingdom, he had not raised a banner, but heaven felt the shift, the slow erosion of unity, like silk beginning to tear along a hidden seam. The angelic host began to whisper. Some wondered in silence, some trembled and turned away. Others leaned in. Lucifer spoke to them not as a tyrant, but as a teacher, a mystic of new mysteries, a bearer of hidden truths. Was the light not given to share, he asked, eyes glowing like amber wind. Does the fire not wish to spread? Have you not felt it in yourselves, the ache to rise beyond your name? These were not accusations, they were invitations, and many accepted. Uriel watched from the watchtowers of the firmament. His scrolls had never recorded a fracture like this, not of being, but of belonging. Angels who once wept in unity now gazed inwards, echoing songs no longer directed toward the throne. Their harmonies curved, their wings stiffened. Their eyes, once filled with holy wonder, now searched for their own reflection in the faces of others. Lucifer, the morning star, had become a dawn unto himself. He began to dream aloud a sin, yet unspoken, but simmering, of a realm beneath heaven, shaped in his image. A court of stars arranged not around the Most High, but around his radiance. Not to replace God, no, never so crude, but to augment him. To show that divinity could multiply, that thrones could be many, not one. He did not rage against the light. He offered to expand it. But what he did not say, what pride never says aloud, is that his kingdom could not exist unless the one above him was moved aside. And so, the first paradox was born, a rebellion disguised as revelation, a war hiding in worship. Gabriel, keeper of divine messages, felt it in the winds, a shift in heaven's breath. Songs that once rose like rivers now pooled around a different mountain. Not Zion, not the eternal place, but a throne made of ambition, still invisible, still unbuilt, but felt. And in that weightless court of false light, Lucifer began to believe. He believed his own dream. He saw the throne, saw the stars gathered, saw the multitudes bowing, not in flattery and faith. His pride no longer needed seduction, it became conviction. He believed he deserved the crown, that God's fire was not only within him, but owed to him. And once pride believes it is owed, it is no longer a whisper, it is a decree. Michael watched as the hosts trembled. The veil had not torn yet. No swords had been drawn. But in the silence between heaven's breaths, he felt the wound widening. He climbed the sapphire vault, where only those closest to the throne could dwell, and laid his heart bare before the holy flame. He asked no judgment, he sought no wrath, He simply wept, for he knew what was coming. Lucifer too ascended, not in spirit, in plan. He counted among him thousands upon thousands, radiant and willing. Thrones, dominions, principalities, who once bathed in Eden's joy, now waited for his command. And still, the Most High said nothing, not because he did not see, not because he did not care, but because the gift of will is sacred even when it wounds. The mirror, once clear, now glowed with smoke. It no longer showed Lucifer's reflection, it showed his future, his imagined crown, his imagined hosts, his imagined dominion. And he said within himself, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the congregation. I will be like the Most High. He did not speak it aloud, but heaven heard it, for the heart speaks louder than thunder in the halls of the divine. And so, the mirror of pride was now a gateway. Behind it waited war, and the angels stood, some in sorrow, some in awe, some in dread, and still the heavens waited. There came a silence, not even the stars dared to disturb. A sacred stillness, thick as prophecy, fell across the corridors of heaven. Not a silence of peace, but of pause. A moment in eternity when all eyes turned inward and the soul of the celestial realm held its breath. Lucifer now stood apart, no longer the light-bearer, but the self-burned flame. He had crossed no threshold, lifted no sword, made no declaration before the throne. And yet, a kingdom had already formed within him, invisible but complete. And where pride sits long enough in silence, it speaks. He called them to him the angels who had circled his light. They came not as soldiers but as dreamers, princes of realms unborn, spirits whose loyalty had turned inward. He named them not rebels, but architects. They were to be builders of the new dawn, not in defiance, in divine expansion. And they believed it. They needed to believe it. For to betray light without cause is to die. But to do so in the name of light, that is how darkness begins. Heaven watched the loyal, the unsure, the weeping. The golden plains of eternal calm grew tense. The wheels within wheels ceased their dance. The cherubim hovered in, held breath. And the seraphim, who had never looked away from the throne, now felt heat behind them from another fire. Michael walked alone through the halls of stars. He did not gather armies. He did not shout warnings. His war would not be waged with numbers, but with truth. He sought only the will of the Most High, and from the silence of glory it was given. Let him speak, and so he did. Lucifer rose above the sea of glass, his wings spread wide, burning with a beauty corrupted only by purpose. He no longer shined in reflection, he burned in hunger. He spoke of freedom. He spoke of becoming. He spoke of a second throne, of a new heaven, of a dawn shared. And with each word, heaven grew colder. Then Michael stepped forward. He did not shine. He did not soar. He stood. His wings furled behind him like the stillness before a storm. His sword was not drawn. His face was not fierce. He asked only a question. Who is like God? It was not defiance. It was remembrance. And in that moment, all who heard it were pierced not by violence, but by clarity. The illusion of Lucifer's light flickered. The mirror cracked. But pride, once fed, does not starve easily. Lucifer turned, voice sharpened, by glory warped. Is it blasphemy to want what was gifted? Is it rebellion to step into the light that made me? Michael's eyes burned, not with wrath but with sorrow. You were made to reflect, not to rule. Lucifer's wings curved around him like a crown. Then let there be many reflections. Let us all rise. And with that word, us the veil tore. Not the veil of fabric, nor space, but of unity. The war had not yet begun in fire or fury, but it had begun. A line drawn not in ash, but in allegiance. 1/3 stood behind Lucifer, their forms still glorious, their voices still angelic, but their roots had shifted. No longer watered by obedience, they drank only from ambition. The hosts of heaven looked on hearts split, the air thick with the tremor of eternity. Lucifer opened his wings wide. Michael lifted his sword. And between them, the sky darkened not from clouds, but from silence. For in that moment, heaven wept. Not for fear, not for loss, but because glory had become hunger and worship had become war. The mirror was shattered, the wound was open, and still the heavens waited. There are moments in the deep places of eternity when even light stops moving, when the stars hold still in their courses, when the breath of God becomes quiet, and the fabric of all that is trembles with things unspoken. This was such a moment. The veil between unity and unraveling had torn, but no fire yet fell, no blade had yet clashed with another. The first cries of war had not rung out. Instead, all of heaven simply paused. Not from confusion, not from hesitation, but from holy sorrow. For what had been unthinkable had now become inevitable. The sons of dawn, once bound in praise, stood across from one another in dreadful silence. The heavenly mountains, where choirs once danced, now stood empty. The rivers of spirit light, which flowed with eternal joy, slowed their song. Thrones that turned in flaming circles halted. The eyes of the cherubim, covered in wonder, turned toward the breach in the sky, toward the gathering of those who had chosen the mirror over the flame. Lucifer had not yet struck. He stood above the sea of crystal fire, radiant still, but darkened by intent. His eyes shimmered with defiance clothed in beauty. Around him rose the host of the persuaded thrones and dominions, watchers and flames, angels who believed in the dream of shared light, of a new dawn, of a kingdom not given but taken. And yet, no one moved. Because even for those who stood with him, something holy still clung to their wings. The memory of song, the scent of the throne, the echo of a name they had not yet fully denied. Michael stood upon the Mount of Stars, sword in hand, yet unraised. His gaze was fixed not on the multitudes who had turned, but on Lucifer himself, the friend, the morning, the shadow, now crowned in self-made fire. Michael's heart did not beat with hatred. It pulsed with ache, the ache of something beautiful being torn from its place in the story. All of heaven waited for the Most High to speak, but the throne was silent. Not absent, not idle, but sovereign. For even now, as the lines had been drawn, the Holy One offered space not for escape, but for return. Even now, the gates of glory were open. Even now, if a single wing would turn back, if a single voice would break from the song of self and cry, "I remember," all would halt. The fire could be quenched, the sword sheathed, but none moved. The fallen had already fallen not in body, but in heart. The mirror had replaced the mountain, and so the breath of heaven held itself, a breath older than stars, a breath that remembered the shaping of light, a breath that once spoke, "Let there be." Now it waited. Gabriel knelt beneath the columns of flame, hands folded, his voice gone quiet. The messenger had no words. For what message could be sent when choice had already been made? What trumpet could be sounded when ears had chosen silence? Raphael stood by the waters of healing, which now stirred without rest. His wings trembled with grief, for he felt the sickness rising not of body, but of being, the illness of pride. The fever of light twisted inward. Uriel, keeper of flame and wisdom, had closed his scrolls. For prophecy was now unfolding not in vision, but in action. What had been hidden was now visible. What had been warned was now alive. And the Most High, from the place beyond place, did not flinch. He watched, for to be the source of all things is not to be surprised by anything, even heartbreak. And so, the stillness thickened. Lucifer spread his wings slowly, letting their brilliance arc across the void between him and the throne of eternity. A final offering not of submission, but of invitation. His silence was a challenge, his posture a question, "Will you let me rise?" Michael remained unmoved, not in stubbornness, in truth. He did not need to answer, for the question itself was flawed. There is no rising apart from the source. There is no crown outside the flame. The moment Lucifer sought to rise alone, he had already fallen. And yet, the moment still stretched. One more heartbeat of heaven, one more breath, one more chance, but none turned back. And still, the heavens waited. There is a sacred terror in the moment before the storm, not in the thunder, but in the waiting, the holy hush before the heavens tear open. The watchers of the lower realms, whose eyes see beyond light, began to tremble. The firmaments quivered like a veil drawn thin. The eternal music, once constant, once cascading like waters from the mouth of God, now ceased. Even the creatures closest to the throne, whose faces are flame and whose voices shake the deep, grew still. It was not silence born of peace. It was the silence of decision. And decision had come. Lucifer stood in full radiance, not diminished, not yet devoured. The stones upon his chest still glittered, sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, all the jewels once given to reflect the beauty of the Most High. But now they shone alone, detached from source, like stars burning in exile. He stood tall, not as a sun, but as a rival. The host behind him mirrored his defiance. They did not weep, they did not shake. They stood upright, firm in their resolve, drawn not by hatred of the holy, but by hunger for a new throne. They still bore beauty, but it was the kind of beauty that blinds rather than reveals. Their wings were wide, their forms lit like dawn, but their eyes were filled not with light, but with longing. It was then that the final shift came. Not in word, not in battle, but in soul. Lucifer lifted his voice, not as a hymn but as a declaration, the first sound in heaven not directed upward, a sound that glorified the created above the creator, a sound that broke harmony, and the stars winced. He said, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High." And the throne remained still, because now the time of mercy had passed, the breath of waiting ended, and heaven exhaled. A sound swept through the highest realms, not of wrath, but of authority, a vibration that moved not like wind, but like judgment. The sea of glass roared with a fire that did not burn but revealed. And from the midst of it, Michael rose. But he did not rise as before. This was not the brother. This was the sword. His face shone like the first sunrise. His wings stretched to the corners of the cosmos. His presence gathered behind it all, the weight of justice, since time unspoken. He carried no anger, only the will of the one who cannot be moved. He did not speak his own name. He spoke the name of the One. And at that sound, the sky split, the stars bowed, the foundations of heaven cracked with song. The angels who had remained faithful ignited with power. Their forms swelled with righteousness, their wings caught flame, and their eyes turned from sorrow to fire. No longer would they weep. Now they would defend. Not themselves, not their place. They would defend the order. The design written into the first light, the harmony that birthed creation. And Michael, with sword now drawn, a blade of purest flame, forged not by hand but by holiness, lifted it high above the gathering storm. Still, he gave one last gaze to Lucifer. A silent question, but Lucifer did not flinch. His own blade emerged, dark as void, rimmed in counterfeit flame. Not made in heaven, but summoned by his will corrupted, turned inward. And with that, the silence shattered. There was no trumpet, no speech, only a crack like the bones of the stars breaking. And then, war. But not as mortals understand war. This was not battle of blood. It was light against light, sound against sound, wing against wing, truth against the absence of truth. The moment pride struck holiness, the very heavens trembled with grief and glory. Angels, who had once harmonized, now clashed. Their voices, once blended, now collided, in cries that shook the pillars of eternity. Lucifer moved with grace, his blade sweeping like song twisted. He was fury and elegance. He struck not only with fire, but with memories, trying to unravel loyalty by reminding them of what they had lost together. But Michael did not answer with memory. He answered with command. The sword of the throne was not wielded by flesh. It was truth embodied. And where it passed, deception tore. Hosts fell from the sky like thunder rolling backward. The earth, not yet formed in dust, felt the tremor. The dust that would one day be Adam shuddered in its future. The waters that would one day drown giants quaked in waiting. For this was not a small war. It was the war behind all wars, and still it had only begun. The war in heaven was not a chaos of fury, but a rhythm of judgment, a choreography of justice, thunderous and precise. Each clash between angel and angel sent ripples through the realms not yet born. The realms of form and time would later echo what was decided in these moments. For this was not a conflict of swords alone, it was a reckoning of intent. Every blow struck was the breaking of a lie. Every parry was the shielding of a sacred design. Michael moved like a holy flame made flesh. He did not shout, he did not taunt. His silence was his power, and the power was truth. Around him gathered the loyal Gabriel with the voice of winds, Raphael with healing turned to wrath, Uriel burning with divine reason. They were not many, but they were enough. For righteousness does not need numbers, it needs only alignment. Lucifer surged across the battlefield of stars like a meteor crowned in mirrors. His beauty had become terror, his light a blade turned against its own source. He no longer spoke in questions, no longer whispered promises. He commanded now, he ruled now. To his followers, he was not just a prince, he was becoming a god. And yet, each command cost him. Each strike twisted what remained of the joy that once wrapped his wings. He bled not with wounds, but with loss. The angels who followed him fought not as traitors, but as believers. Believers in the vision of a second glory. Their fall was not yet sealed, for they believed they rose, and that belief made them fierce. But belief does not make falsehood true, and so, the more they struck, the more they unraveled. The firmament above cracked with song not of melody but of revelation. Each note born from Michael's sword peeled back layers of illusion. The fire of heaven was not wrathful, it was revealing. And when the revealed saw themselves truly, many screamed. Some of the fallen tried to turn mid-flight. Their wings faltered, their hearts broke, but the divide was too deep. There is a line which, once crossed, cannot be returned from, not because mercy ends, but because pride no longer wants it. Lucifer faced Michael in the highest vault, where no shadow had ever lingered. The last, untouched place. They met with a silence that thundered louder than any voice. Michael's gaze was still not cold, but eternal. You were given everything, it said without words. Lucifer's eyes, once emerald with wonder, now burned like darkened opal. I was given limits, they answered. Then the swords met, and the heavens convulsed. Their clash was not metal, but meaning, not steel, but glory against glory. When Michael struck, he did not attack, he restored. Each movement of his blade unraveled the lie, not by force, but by revealing the origin of it. Truth does not conquer by domination, it conquers by illumination. And Lucifer, once the bearer of light, could no longer bear its weight. The moment the tip of Michael's sword touched his chest, not in violence, but in final clarity, Lucifer saw. He saw the throne not as tyrant, but as source. He saw his wings, not as his own, but given. He saw his rise, not as destiny, but distortion. And in that flash he knew he had not risen, he had turned, and heaven wept. The Most High spoke not in anger, but in finality, not with thunder, but with release. And with a single word that echoed beyond language, Lucifer and his host were cast down, not with wrath, but with absence. Heaven did not hurl them. Heaven let them go, and that letting go was unbearable. The morning star fell. He fell not through clouds, but through realms, not into earth alone, but into isolation. The farther he fell, the more light tore from his being. The farther he fell, the more glory burned away, until he was no longer Lucifer. He was something else, the dragon, the adversary, the prince of exile, the wound that sings. And as he fell, he did not scream. He swore. He swore vengeance. He swore to rise again. He swore to devour the dust that would be man. He swore that if he could not rule heaven, he would corrupt earth. And so the exile began. Heaven stood whole once more, but not untouched. The wound in its memory would never close. Michael sheathed his sword. The hosts gathered in awe and sorrow. The stars resumed their song, but quieter, and in the quiet the Most High spoke once more, not to condemn, but to comfort. And though the light was restored, the silence lingered, and still the heavens waited. It began not with a roar, but with a silence so profound that even eternity turned its face. Lucifer fell. He did not fall like a meteor, blazing and forgotten. He fell like a memory torn from the mind of God, like a song that once filled the highest places, now cast into a canyon of silence. His descent was not just through space, but through identity. Each breath downward was a stripping, each beat of time a burning away of what he had once been. He was not cast out violently, he was released, and that is what made it unbearable. For to be cast out by wrath is to be struck, but to be let go by love is to feel the loss echo through the bones of your being forever. Lucifer plummeted through realms not known to mortals, layers of unseen structure that hold the created order together. And with each level he fell through, glory peeled away from him like golden skin. His wings, once alabaster rivers of sapphire light, dulled and tore. The precious stones that adorned his breastplate cracked and scattered. His voice, once filled with the resonance of the first song, grew dry and then dark. He reached for the light, as it left him not to return, but to drag it with him. But the light does not follow where love is rejected. It weeps and remains. Heaven did not cheer. There was no applause in the throne room. The faithful did not dance. They mourned. For when one falls who once stood at the edge of the flame, all creation holds its breath. The loss is cosmic, the ache infinite. And so, the angels bowed their heads, even as the heavens realigned. They did not celebrate victory, for this was no triumph, it was a tragedy. Lucifer had not merely lost heaven, he had lost himself. And yet, even as he fell, his will hardened, twisting, coiling, seething, forming shape not from love, but from rage. His form contorted, not from outside, but from within. Pride became the sculptor now, and pride, when robbed of light, becomes fury. His beauty did not vanish, it inverted. What was once splendid now struck terror. What was once a song now hissed. What was once wonder became wound. By the time he struck the lower realms, he was no longer the morning star. He was the fallen, the first exile, the beginning of corruption, and he did not fall alone. A third of heaven had chosen him, and they fell with him like ash poured into a pit. Their cries, once holy, now cracked the fabric of silence. These were not demons, as man would know them, not yet. These were still beings of fire, But that fire no longer warmed. It consumed. The watchers, the thrones, the powers who aligned themselves with Lucifer's dream, now plummeted through shadow, their names unsung by heaven. The sky that received them was not sky, it was void, formless, cold. Earth had not yet been formed in clay, but the foundation of creation had begun to hum with tremor. The place where man would walk now trembled under the approach of the fallen ones. And as Lucifer landed upon the edge of what would be Eden's world, not as Lord, but as invader, the dust beneath him recoiled. He rose, slowly, not with glory, but with vengeance, not with worship, but with wrath. He opened his eyes, now blackened with stolen fire, and swore by the remnants of his shattered crown. I will rise again. If not in heaven, then upon the earth. I will wear the dust like a robe. I will enter into their seed. I will twist what he loves. I will poison what he breathes. And from the dirt, I will build a kingdom that remembers me. Thus was born the first prophecy of rebellion upon the world of men, not by word, but by wound. Heaven above returned to stillness. The throne remained untouched. The sword was sheathed. But beneath it all, the exile began to scheme. He would not forget. He would not forgive. And still the heavens waited. The earth had not yet bloomed, yet its soil already groaned. Lucifer stood in the hollow, between realms not heaven, not hell, but a place of waiting. A realm undefined, trembling under the weight of exile. Here there was no throne, no altar, no holy name spoken aloud. Only the echo of what had been lost. Only the cold silence that greeted those who believed they could ascend without permission. His wings hung in tatters, yet still he held himself as king. Not because he was, but because he must. Pride could not admit fallenness, it could only double itself, reshaping ruin into a crown of scorched gold. Around him fell the others, his host of the deceived, the convinced, the proud. They did not wail, they roared. Their voices, twisted yet still echoing heaven's forgotten harmonies, shook the deep. They screamed not in agony but in refusal. They would not accept defeat, they would not mourn. Instead, they rose from the ash and declared themselves sovereign in exile. Their glory had become bitterness, their power now unanchored from obedience, and in that detachment something new began to grow, hatred, not merely of heaven but of man. For it was whispered among them now that a new creation would rise, that from the dust they now hovered above, something sacred would be shaped. A creature of breath and clay, formed not of fire, not of stars, but of earth. Yet it would be called beloved, crowned with purpose, invited to walk with the divine, to receive what Lucifer had lost. This, above all, was intolerable. To the dust, Lucifer said, his voice a blade forged in fury. To dirt, he gives his name. To breath and bone, the inheritance of light. He turned his gaze downward to the void where Eden would soon bloom, and his eyes burned with prophecy. Not the kind born in heaven, but the kind that festers in exile. They will carry his image, and I will mar it. They will walk in his garden, and I will lead them to thorns. They will be offered light, and I will make them crave the dark. And thus, the war in heaven did not end in heaven. It descended. It became a war for earth. The fallen spread across the lower heavens like a storm without sound. They shaped shadows where no light had yet been lit. They created structure from spite towers, not of stone, but of thought. False realms, counterfeit glories, reflections of heaven, inverted. Their names became whispers, not praised, but feared. Azazel, Semyaza, Sariel, Armoros. Once thrones of brilliance, now architects of corruption. And among them, Lucifer moved like a king crowned in echoes. He no longer needed the throne, he would make his own. A throne forged not in holiness, but in hunger. not lifted by worship, but by need. He began to sing again, not the song of heaven, but a song of self. It rippled through the void, searching for ears, searching for any who would listen, and though heaven did not hear it, earth did. For the garden was near, the clay was almost breathed upon, and the breath that would animate man was not far from being drawn. Lucifer waited, not in silence, but in strategy. He no longer needed war in the skies. He needed only influence in the dust, a whisper in the right ear, a seed of doubt in the right soul. Heaven had cast him down, but earth had not yet been guarded, and so the serpent prepared, not with venom, but with voice, not with teeth, but with timing. And even as the Most High shaped man with love, with care, with intention, the exile watched and waited and swore that no matter how beautiful Eden would become, he would walk beneath its trees and twist its fruit and kiss the ear of its firstborn, not with love, but with memory. For the serpent would never forget the sound of heaven closing behind him, and still the heavens waited. Eden was not yet planted, but its echo already stirred in the breath of God. The soil longed for the hands that would till it. The rivers dreamed of reflection. The sky, stretched in newborn silence, waited for the eyes that would one day name its stars. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of light, the fallen morning star watched not in awe, but in calculation. Lucifer, once the guardian of divine mystery, now lingered in the corridors between realms. He walked no longer in glory, but in shadows spun from memory. His light had curdled into cunning. His wings, once messengers of praise, now carried prophecy of destruction. He who once asked, "Why not me?" now whispered, "Why not them?" For man was coming, and with him the unbearable grace. Clay would be shaped by a touch that once adorned Lucifer's own being. Breath would be given that once echoed in his lungs. And from the soil would rise a creature not as radiant, not as winged, not as ancient, but as chosen. And that word, chosen, became to Lucifer a wound deeper than any blade forged in heaven. He gathered his host, not in fire, but in purpose. They came not to destroy, not yet, but to plan. For war, once waged in the heavens with swords, would now be waged in minds, in hearts, in bloodlines. The rebellion had shifted. Its battlefield was now the soul. "We will not challenge the throne," Lucifer spoke, his voice no longer melodic, but measured. "We will challenge its image." And so began the slow liturgy of corruption. Lucifer would not strike Eden with force. He would wait for it to open. He would not defile man with storm. He would bend him with suggestion. For what Lucifer had learned in his fall was this: the surest way to unseat the divine is not to strike the throne, but to seduce its reflection. So he became the serpent, not a beast, but a metaphor made flesh, a coil of wisdom perverted, of beauty re-aimed. He would become the whisper that felt like truth, the counsel that sounded like freedom, the hand that offered light, wrapped in shadow. And when Adam would one day wake, eyes filled with first wonder, and when Eve would one day walk, voice filled with first praise, Lucifer would be there, not in form, but in presence. He would wait for the pause, in the question, for the breath between belief and curiosity, for the hunger he knew so well. And when that moment came, he would not scream, he would suggest. Did God really say? The rebellion would become a religion, the exile a teacher, and the fallen apostles of the oldest lie. You can be like God. And so, as heaven healed, and Eden prepared, and the Most High formed man in sacred silence, Lucifer wrapped himself in prophecy. Not the kind written in scrolls, but the kind carved into temptation. The stars had seen war. Now they would watch seduction. And earth, still trembling with the breath of what would be, began to hum. Not with joy alone, but with a coming wound. The morning star had fallen, and now, his light would move through the cracks, not as radiance, but as a shadow shaped like glory, and still the heavens waited. There are angels who sing. There are angels who serve. There are angels who remember. But there is one who was born for war, not war as man understands it, loud and reckless, forged in the fires of pride, but war as heaven knows it, precise, holy, slow as thunder, and bright as judgment. Michael. His name is a question carved into the roots of time itself. Who is like God? It is not a boast. It is not a threat. It is the song of humility dressed in fire. A name not meant to draw glory to itself, but to pierce every pretense that dares rise against the Eternal One. He was not made with wings of silk. He was not adorned with rubies or covered in melodies. He was built from flame pure, steady, unwavering. Not the flame that devours, the flame that defends. From the moment the stars were cast, like seeds across the deep, Michael stood at the edge of their song, watching, shielding, whispering the name of the Holy into their motion. He did not envy the singers. He did not long for the secrets. He was the sword, the wall, the cry at the gate. When Lucifer first turned his gaze inward, Michael felt it. When the song curved into self, Michael heard it. When the light sought its own reflection, Michael stood. But he did not accuse. He did not rage. He waited until heaven called. When the throne finally stirred and the silence of sorrow gave way to reckoning, it was Michael who rose, not with fury, with clarity. Not to protect God, for the Most High needs no protection, but to protect the order, the harmony, the sacred design. And when Lucifer lifted his eyes as a challenger, Michael lifted his sword as an answer. Not a threat, a reminder. It was not forged from metal. It was spoken into being a blade of presence, a flame of the holy will. It did not burn from heat. It burned from truth. Wherever it passed, lies could not stand. Deception unraveled. Pride unmasked itself. The sword was not a weapon. It was a revelation. When war broke among the hosts, it was Michael who moved first. Not like a general barking orders, but like a wind that had waited long to be released. He descended not with noise, but with thunder wrapped in silence. His wings split the shadows. His voice broke the illusions. He did not shout. He declared. And when the fallen rose in rebellion, he did not tremble. He remembered. He remembered the first light. He remembered the harmony before the mirror. He remembered what it meant to serve, not out of fear, but awe. Lucifer had once walked beside him. Now he stood against him, and Michael, the sword of the throne, would not yield. He moved through the battlefield like prophecy with wings. Every motion was history returning to itself. Every blow reminded creation what order looked like when it wore flame. He did not relish battle. He did not taste triumph. He fought as heaven fights, with sorrow, with strength, with sacred fury that burns without hate. Heaven's armies gathered behind him, Gabriel with his winds, Uriel with his fire, Raphael with healing turned to sword. Not a mob, not a legion, a choir of justice. And Michael stood at their head. He who had never sought a crown now wore one of flame, not for glory, for duty. And still the heavens waited. Michael did not carry ambition in his wings. He did not dream of dominion. His breath had never once said, "I will rise." His strength came from another place, from stillness, from obedience, from that ancient and sacred fire that asks for nothing but burns forever. He was heaven's response to unmaking. Lucifer had tried to rise by his own brilliance. He had stitched a crown out of self-regard. But Michael's crown was not worn. It was carried behind him by every act of loyalty, every step of surrender to the one who alone is uncreated. In the war of light, Michael fought with remembrance. Every stroke of his sword rang with echoes of the first voice, the one that once said, "Let there be," and tore the dark in two. He remembered the garden behind the veil, the place before choice. He remembered the music that knew no dissonance. He remembered Lucifer not as an enemy, but as a brother lost to his own reflection. And though he struck, he wept, for Michael's heart, though built for war, still ached with love. Not love for the rebellion, but love for what should have been. He did not fight to destroy, he fought to preserve. When Lucifer's host came at him, clothed in stolen splendor, he did not stagger. They bore lights that shimmered like heaven, but did not sing like it. And Michael, with every swing, revealed the difference between imitation and origin. The fallen ones fell not because he cut them down, but because they could not stand in the presence of unyielding truth. For the sword of Michael is not a blade, it is a mirror. And when the corrupted look into it, they see not the lie, but the cost. They see what they gave up. They see what they became. And many could not bear that sight. Some shrieked, some burned, some simply vanished. Michael moved through them, not with pride, but with purpose. He called out to the wavering, not with threats, but with remembrance. "Return," he whispered, even as fire roared. Before the final breath, return. Some heard him, some turned, but most did not. Lucifer descended again, face twisted, with a fury born not of hate, but of heartbreak denied. He had once stood beside Michael. Now he burned to unmake him. He screamed, truths inverted, prophecies poisoned. "You cling to chains," he roared. "I bring freedom." Michael's reply was stillness. "Freedom," he said softly, "does not begin in the self. It begins in surrender." They clashed, wings against wings, flame against flame. Two lights, one holy, one fallen, met in the heart of the unseen realm. The collision did not echo. It resonated across dimensions yet unborn. Worlds felt it, seeds yet unplanted trembled. The very dust that would shape Adam pulsed with the memory of it. Their battle was not rage. It was reckoning. Lucifer struck with desperation, with the wrath of one who knew the truth and chose to fight it anyway. He summoned storms of brilliance, illusions of sovereignty, shadows wrapped in light. Michael answered not with might, but with meaning. He fought not just with strength, but with silence filled with power. Lucifer screamed, "I am the dawn." Michael whispered, "Only he is." Lucifer thundered, "I was made in glory." Michael replied, "And glory is returned." Then, in the pause between strikes, Lucifer hesitated, only for a breath, only for a sliver of time. And Michael saw it, the crack, the echo, the ache, for beneath the fury still lived the memory of what had been lost. But pride cannot kneel, it hardens at the sight of mercy. Lucifer struck again, but it was done. With a final movement, not cruel, not vengeful, but necessary, Michael brought down the sword, and all the heavens held their breath once more. For in that moment, the exile of light was sealed. Not just cast out, but cut off. And still, the heavens waited. When the final blow fell, there was no scream. There was silence, the kind that feels eternal, the kind that comes not after victory, but after separation. The kind that lingers like the space between two hands once joined, now pulled apart. Lucifer fell. But Michael did not watch him fall. He lowered his sword, slowly, as the light faded from the air. His wings folded over him like a mantle, not of pride, but of grief. He did not smile. He did not shout. He simply stood, as the echo of the battle dissolved into the stillness of eternity restored. Around him, the host began to descend, weary, glowing, holy, some with tears in their eyes, others with flames upon their brows. The halls of heaven were intact, the throne untouched. But something had changed, not in God, not in glory, but in memory. Never again would heaven be called innocent. Never again would light be assumed incorruptible. Never again would trust be unguarded. Michael looked upon the field where wings had burned and choirs had clashed, and he spoke not to the angels, but to the silence. "It is finished." But even as he said it, he knew it was only the beginning. For though Lucifer had been cast out, he had not been extinguished. The dragon still breathed. He now walked beneath the veil, hidden from Eden's gates, waiting for the moment when man would rise and fall, waiting for his chance to return, not through storm, but through seduction. And Michael the sword, the flame, the guardian would not rest. He would stand again, not in heaven alone, but in dreams, in visions, in the quiet places where light is threatened by whisper. He would walk beside prophets. He would war through prayer. He would rise in the last days, when the trumpet sounds again and the heavens split not with sorrow, but with judgment. His sword would never rust, for it is forged in the fire that cannot be quenched, the fire of truth. Lucifer would become the adversary. But Michael would remain the answer, the cry, the shield, the flame behind the faithful. And so he turned, back toward the throne, toward the light that never falters. The throne did not speak. It had already spoken. The act of casting out had not been wrath. It had been mercy's last breath. Michael bowed low before it, pressing his forehead to the sea of crystal flame, not in pride, not in fatigue, in worship. And the throne radiated, not with noise, with knowing. The war was over, but the war had begun, for earth now waited, and Eden would soon open. And the serpent had already found the garden. Michael stood once more, lifted by silence and duty, and his sword shimmered in rest. But within its flame was a promise. If darkness ever dares again, I will rise. And still, the heavens waited. They fell like stars, remembering sorrow, not all at once, not as fire, but as memory torn from the mind of glory and cast into silence. The angels who followed Lucifer, the ones who turned their gaze inward, who traded awe for ambition, descended through the veil like embers from a forgotten altar. And as they fell, the heavens did not shout. They mourned. These were not nameless spirits. They were thrones, they were dominions, they were watchers of mysteries, bearers of ancient flame, keepers of the upper paths. They had once stood in the circle of the holy, wrapped in wind and wonder, singing the names that shaped the stars. Now, they were cast down, not merely stripped of rank, not simply displaced. They were exiled, severed from the presence they were created to behold. Some fell screaming, others in silence. Some reached upward, as if trying to gather what could no longer be touched. Others fell with eyes open wide, already plotting what they might become. Because not all who fall are broken. Some fall and begin to build again. They descended into the lower realm, the place between glory and dust. A place not yet named hell, but heavy with its coming. It was empty, yet watching, silent, yet swelling. And in this realm, the cast-down ones took root. Lucifer, their prince, now shrouded in shadows of his former light, stood among them. No longer son of the morning. Now he was something else. He wore exile like a crown. He named the silence kingdom. He called the abyss throne. And the ones who followed him, still glowing with fractured glory, gathered in darkened order, their names twisted like smoke. Azazel, who once taught the stars their rhythm, now brooded in silence, planning how to offer forbidden knowledge to mortals not yet born. Semyaza, once a prince of divine wisdom, now studied the hearts of clay even before they beat, plotting to plant seeds of pride in the unborn. Serial, whose eyes once wept with holy visions, now longed to lead men to dreams that would drown them. They were not monsters. They were angels without anchor, eternal beings with no place to pour their fire, and fire without purpose becomes devouring. They looked upon the realm below, where earth waited to be shaped, where man would walk barefoot in the dew of dawn, and they felt something twist, not jealousy, not rage, but hunger. The kind that begins in absence and ends in possession. They could not return to heaven, but they could touch the earth, and they would. Not to redeem their exile, but to replicate it, to cast down others as they had been cast down, to take what was not given, to build kingdoms in the dust. And so, in that silence before Eden bloomed, they began to prepare, not with armies, with ideas. For what Lucifer had learned, the others had embraced. The greatest victories are not won through force, they are won through influence. They would teach man to rise, to stretch beyond his breath, to reach beyond the veil, to crave what was forbidden and call it freedom. The cast down ones would become teachers of secret things, and the secrets would rot the soul. The watchers would descend again, not in glory, but in disguise, and heaven, though sealed from their ascent, would watch. Michael would not forget, Gabriel would not sleep. Raphael would walk among the edges of Eden's breath, waiting. For the fall of the angels was not the end, it was the seed. And what would grow from that seed would shake the dust forever, and still the heavens waited. The abyss welcomed them, not with warmth, but with weight. It was not a place of fire. Not yet. It was a hush, a vast expanse of unspeaking, a canvas without stars, without sun, without sound. And in this void, the cast-down ones gathered like fallen embers, glowing faintly, each bearing the remnants of glory, like the memory of a name no longer spoken aloud. They walked among the dust of unformed realms, where light had not yet chosen direction, and time had not yet tasted age. There, in that yawning stillness beneath the heavens, they began to whisper. They did not weep, they did not repent, they plotted. Because what cannot return to the throne may yet build its own. Lucifer, now wrapped in veils of what once was holy, surveyed the realm with a heart blackened by brilliance denied. His pride had not been broken, it had calcified. He no longer sought the Most High. He sought only mirrors, places where he could reflect himself back to himself through worship, through power, through imitation. "I will not kneel," he said to the others. "I will recreate." And the watchers believed him. They believed not because he promised redemption, but because he promised purpose. The fall had left them empty. Lucifer gave them a plan, and it began with man. For man, they had heard, would be different. Not flame, not spirit alone, but clay infused with breath, the name. A creature kissed by the very voice they had abandoned, a being lower in rank, yet crowned in affection. And that they could not abide. So the watchers waited. They watched Eden rise, a garden, not merely of trees, but of presence, a place where time walked gently, where breath and bone communed with the eternal in the cool of day. They watched Adam take form, not radiant, not winged, not burning, but alive. And they saw the divine joy written into his design, and they envied, not his power, but his proximity. He walked with the One, he was loved. And love, when seen from exile, becomes unbearable. The watchers whispered to one another, not in speech, but in communion, their voices curled around the edges of the garden, seeking entry. They could not yet touch, but they could plan. And from their planning grew the first doctrine of corruption. Azazel spoke, "We will give them weapons before they need them. We will teach them fire before they fear the cold." Semyaza murmured, "We will descend, not in wrath, but in wisdom. Let us become what they call divine." Sariel nodded, "Let us give them eyes for hidden things, so they may forget who made the light." And so the cast-down ones prepared their descent, not as angels, not as beasts, but as teachers. Their goal was not to destroy man, it was to reshape him in their own image, to turn the clay upward before it could kneel, to lace the breath with pride before it could pray, to sow questions where trust was meant to grow. And in the shadows outside Eden's gate, the first seeds were sown. They began crafting words, ideas, temptations, each one like a strand of silk, soft, beautiful, and deadly. They would wait for the moment. The garden was breached, not by sword, but by choice. And when man's gaze turned away from the face of God, the watchers would step in. They would not come as conquerors, they would come as guides. And the war that began in heaven would continue in knowledge, in desire, in legacy, in blood. Lucifer stood at the center of them all, eyes locked upon the rising dawn of man's first story. He no longer longed for heaven, he longed to rewrite it. And the watchers stood ready, their wings no longer bright, their purpose no longer pure, but their mission as clear as crystal. We fell, and we will pull them with us. And still the heavens waited. They descended not in storms but in veils, not as dragons or monsters, but as lights that mimicked the holy. The cast-down ones came wearing what they had lost: beauty, wisdom, radiance, twisted just enough to deceive. They touched the earth not with fire, but with fascination. And the earth, still tender in its innocence, trembled with the feeling of something it had never known, presence that was not blessed. The watchers came in secret. They did not march upon Eden. They drifted through its edges. They whispered through leaves. They waited in the quiet moments, the hesitation between trust and curiosity, the silence before the soul asks, "Why?" And when the whisper first reached Eve, not with threat, but with wonder, the seed of their plan took root. For that was always the goal, to be heard, not by heaven, but by man. Lucifer did not come as a conqueror, he came as a question. Coiled in the garden's shadow, he offered not death, but insight, not rebellion, but revelation. And the fruit, once simply forbidden, now shimmered with the suggestion that knowledge could be seized, not received. Did God really say? Those 4 words were the echo of his fall. The same lie repackaged, not in the language of pride, but of possibility. And when Eve reached, the watchers rejoiced, not with song, but with silence. For silence is what fills the air just before glory departs. The cast-down ones watched as innocence shattered like dew upon dry ground, and when man hid from God, they smiled not from joy, but from victory. Not because they had destroyed him, but because they had changed him. That was always the war, not to end what God had made, but to invert it, to reflect it back to itself in distortion. And now the gates of Eden closed, not just in geography, in spirit. Man would still walk, still breathe, still name stars and build kingdoms. But now every motion would carry a tremor, every breath a shadow. The watchers descended further still, into the hearts of cities, into the blood of kings. They would walk among men, unseen but never absent, always offering more. More beauty, more knowledge, more power. And in doing so, they built the first altars to themselves, false thrones, counterfeit heavens, temples without light. They would be called gods in time by names that changed with language, but never in essence. They taught men how to make weapons, how to paint their bodies with war, how to read the stars with corrupted eyes, how to charm the elements and call it wisdom. Their gifts glittered like fire at night, but every gift was a chain, every secret a doorway into greater hunger. And beneath it all, Lucifer ruled not with armies but with ideas, not as a tyrant, but as an architect. His kingdom was not built with stone, it was built with stories, myths, lies, longings, and the watchers, once guardians of the heavenly flame, became midwives of chaos. They knew what they had done, but still they did not turn back. For the deeper you walk into exile, the harder it is to remember the way home. The Holy One watched from above. He did not forget, he did not slumber, but he did wait. And in that waiting, he began to whisper to his prophets. He began to stir his plan. For if the cast-down ones had planted corruption, he would plant redemption. And from the womb of the woman, something greater than Eden would rise. But for now, the earth groaned. The blood of innocence cried from the soil, and the watchers hid in the shadows of what they had unmade, still glowing, still glorious, still fallen, and still the heavens waited. The garden was closed, but its breath lingered. There, beyond the eastern gate where the cherub with the flaming sword stood guard, the scent of paradise still drifted through the dust. Adam and Eve now walked the world in sorrow, clothed not only in skins, but in memory. And behind them, veiled from sight, yet nearer than blood, the cry began. It was not the cry of a voice, it was the cry of loss, of heaven weeping not for its own wounds, but for the soul of man now fractured, now hunted. The veil between realms remained, but thinner than before, thinner than Eden, thinner than rebellion, and through it something holy still called. For though man had fallen, he had not been forgotten. The Most High had turned no face away. He was already walking the long road to restoration, but beneath the veil the watchers moved. Their steps left no prints, their words left no echoes, but their presence pressed against the fabric of creation like wind behind a curtain. And what they whispered was not command, it was suggestion. They taught men how to shape stone with shadows, how to call fire with their own names, how to write spells instead of prayers, how to look to stars, but not for worship. And so, the bloodlines bent. What had begun in breath now began to warp. Cain spilled his brother's blood, and the soil remembered. The cry behind the veil grew louder. Abel's soul, caught in the memory of innocence, cried out not just for justice, but for healing. The first death had come, and the watchers smiled, for they saw the seed of what they had hoped, a world ruled by pain. But the throne was not silent. The cry behind the veil was the answer. A voice began to stir in the line of Seth, the line that still remembered the sound of Eden's wind. From this line, a people would rise, who longed not for power but for the presence, who did not hunger for secrets but for restoration. Men who still built altars of stone, not to demons dressed in glory, but to the unseen one. And so the battle moved from sky into blood, into family, into lineage. The watchers saw it, and they turned their eyes toward infiltration. They would no longer just teach, they would intertwine. The plan was darker now, more intimate. They would take wives from the daughters of men, not as lustful beasts, but as beings of deceptive grandeur. They would present themselves not as angels, not as monsters, but as gods of love. They would seduce the generations not only with knowledge, but with affection. And the Nephilim were born, giants, yes, but not merely of body of will. Beings not Holy Spirit, not holy man, but forged in rebellion's womb. Their breath carried command. Their blood stirred chaos. They walked the earth like echoes of a war. Heaven had already ended, but earth had just begun. And still, behind the veil, the cry rose. It rose through Enoch, the seventh from Adam, a man who walked with God not in ritual, but in rhythm. He heard the whisper. He saw the veil. He dreamed in the language of the unseen, and heaven opened to him. He saw the watchers. He named them. He saw the end from the beginning, the flood that would one day come, not from wrath, but from mercy. Not to destroy man, but to silence the infection. And Enoch wept, not for himself, not for death, but for the world, now wrapped in shadow that called itself light. For sons who no longer knew their fathers, for blood that no longer remembered breath, for spirits that taught love, but planted ruin. The watchers watched him too, and in him they feared. For in every generation, heaven would raise one, a witness, a prophet, a cry clothed in flesh. And Enoch was the first. He spoke with angels. He judged with words he never learned. He walked until the world could no longer hold him, and he was not. For God took him, and the cry behind the veil grew stronger. It now thundered in the dreams of those still faithful. It whispered in the groves where false gods danced. It wept in the wind as the world turned darker. But it did not stop. The veil had been thinned, and heaven was not done speaking. And still the heavens waited. The days grew long and bitter. The sky, once open and filled with the soft music of innocence, now watched in silence. Not because it was powerless, but because it was waiting. Waiting for man to listen again. Waiting for a heart to break in the right way, not into despair, but into remembrance. The watchers had multiplied their influence. Their knowledge became law. Their presence became religion. Men no longer asked where the voice in the garden had gone. They asked which God would give them more rain, more gold, more victory, more blood, and the watchers gave it freely, because every gift was a noose. Every shrine built in their honor was a fracture in the world's soul. The Nephilim roamed freely, now taller than trees, hungrier than beasts, voices like thunder laced with blasphemy. Their strength was legend, but their hearts were void. They devoured the land not out of need, but from the craving planted in their unnatural blood. Kingdoms bent beneath their feet. Women wept in silence. Fathers bowed in terror. Children learned to worship fear, but not all. There remained a remnant, a line untouched by the seed of angels, a people quiet in the fields, hidden in caves, whispering prayers by firelight. They remembered Enoch. They remembered Adam's voice. They remembered the garden, not as myth, but as origin. These were the quiet flame in the ashes of the world, and to them the cry behind the veil came like dew. It did not shout. It did not command. It invited. Noah heard it first, in the stillness of night, a stirring that did not come from within, but from above. He was a man of earth and sky, of toil and reverence, a man whose eyes had seen the wickedness of giants and chose not to look away from God. To him, the voice whispered, "Build," and so he did. Wood by wood, year by year, mocked by men, ignored by kings, but in heaven, the hammers of Noah were like trumpets of war. Every nail a declaration, the cry has been heard. The veil is breaking, but the watchers did not sleep. They saw the ark rising. They sent dreams to confuse him. They stirred cities to oppose him. But nothing could stop what had already been spoken. The Most High would cleanse the land not in rage, but in mercy. For when corruption cannot be undone, it must be washed. And so the rains waited. The deep waited. The animals began to move without command, drawn by the whisper that still echoed from Eden's dust. The Nephilim laughed. They called Noah mad. They called his God dead. They built altars to themselves. But the sky was not deaf, and the veil had thinned. The time had come. The cast-down ones, now wrapped in their own rebellion, looked to heaven once more, not to return, but to rage. For they knew once the waters rose, their grip would break. Their children would fall. Their names would be lost to mud and ruin. Lucifer stirred among them, his form now wrapped in shifting shadows, his face 1,000 flames of pride and fury. He remembered the flood that had once come for him, not of water, but of truth. And now it would come again. So he turned to the heavens and roared, "Is this justice? Is this mercy?" But there was no reply, only the sound of water, falling, rising, washing. And the veil opened not to man, but to judgment. Still, the cry did not end, because it was never the sound of wrath, it was the sound of return. The whisper that even in destruction there is renewal, even in death, a remnant, even in flood, a future, and still the heavens waited. The rain did not begin with thunder. It began with remembrance, a drop on the cheek of the earth, as though heaven itself wept for what had to come. The trees did not resist. The stones did not cry out. They yielded, as if they too knew that something once beautiful had rotted beyond healing. And so, the flood rose not merely of water, but of will. It was not rage that drove the rain. It was the ache of a father, the grief of a creator, watching his children devour the breath he had given them. The watchers, from their hidden places, trembled. This they had not expected. They had hoped for tolerance, for delay, for endless mercy without movement. But they had forgotten something eternal. Love does not tolerate what destroys the beloved. And man had become a vessel not of God, but of giants. The Nephilim cried out as the waters came, their voices like broken stars, their strength useless against the weight of judgment. Their feet carved no path in the flood. Their blood, once feared, now sank like stone. The hybrid kings, the tyrants of cities built in defiance, fell without song. Their bones would become buried beneath future nations, beneath mountains that would one day forget their names. The watchers wailed, but their cries did not move the throne, because heaven had waited, long, long enough, and now it would cleanse. Above it all, the ark rose silent, steady, alone. It carried not just creatures and kin, it carried promise. A promise whispered behind the veil, before the first hammer struck wood. A promise that light would remain, that a name would be preserved, that the war would not end in drowning, but in rebirth. Noah, within the hollow of that sacred vessel, did not see the giants fall. He heard only the water, but in that sound he heard the cry. It had changed now. No longer grief, no longer warning, but comfort. The veil had not closed, it had moved. It hovered now over the ark, over the promise, over the new world, waiting beneath the deep. It whispered not of wrath, but of hope, that heaven had not abandoned man, that even in the flood God was near, and the watchers were bound, some cast into chains beneath the hills of earth, where no voice rises, others scattered to dry lands, yet to be scorched by time, hiding behind names, waiting for another chance. But they would not rise freely again. The voice of Enoch, once ignored, now thundered in fulfillment. The prophecy of ruin had passed, but the war was not done. For though the world would be born again, though the giants were drowned, though the temples of corruption lay in ruins beneath oceans and dust, the whisper remained, the lie endured, and so did the exile. Lucifer had not been washed away. He stood, unseen, watching the ark float above judgment, and he swore not in fear but in defiance. He had failed to destroy man. But he would learn to control him, through nations, through idols, through kings and songs and laws and empires, through time, and behind him, in the shadows, the watchers remained, some in chains, some in silence, all waiting, for they knew man forgets. And in forgetting, the veil grows thick again. But the cry never stops. The cry is still behind the veil, waiting to be heard, and still the heavens waited. Not all who fell had forgotten heaven. Not all the watchers, even in their exile, had silenced the echo of their first love, the light they once circled in song, the presence they once guarded with awe. And after the flood, when the Nephilim were swallowed by the deep and the waters returned to their silence, the world changed. But grief remained. For judgment had not only broken the corrupted, it had pierced the hearts of the fallen, who still remembered. And for the first time since the great descent, the watchers wept. Their tears were not mortal, they did not fall to the ground. They drifted like shadows across the spirit realm, weightless yet heavy. They held no repentance, only regret. For though they had taught men forbidden things, and mingled heaven's fire with earth's clay, and watched giants walk like curses across the world, they did not rejoice in the ruin. They watched the floodwaters drown their own offspring. They watched the skies weep and remain closed. They felt the doors of heaven sealed to them forever. And in that silence, remorse began to burn in their wings. It was not enough to lift them. It was not pure enough to redeem them, but it was real. Semyaza, who once led the oath of descent, now bowed beneath the weight of a sorrow he could not speak. He wandered the edges of the ruined world, unseen by man, staring into the bones of his buried children. He whispered prayers to a god he had betrayed, and received no answer. Azazel, chained in the dry places, thrashed in silence. His name would become a byword for all corruption his teachings would live on in every sword forged with malice. But still, in the belly of the earth, he remembered the fire of heaven and trembled. Others sat upon the high rocks and watched the dawns they no longer shared. They saw new cities rise, Babel, and beyond, and knew that the old war had not died, only changed its shape. And in this atmosphere of ruin, heaven once again sent a messenger, not to the fallen, but to man. Enoch, the friend of angels, the walker between veils, was brought back in vision, not to live again, but to witness. The Holy One granted him sight beyond death, and what he saw broke him. He saw the watchers in their exile. He saw their sorrow. He saw their schemes continuing, hidden, subtle. He saw their punishment sealed, and he was told to write, to seal up the record of the rebellion, to name them, to warn the generations. And so, the Book of Enoch was whispered into existence, not by invention, but by revelation. It carried the sorrow of heaven, the fury of righteousness, and the ache of remembrance. It named the watchers. It told of the flood. It told of the judgment still to come, but buried within its flame was weeping. The watchers knew their fate. They were bound for the pit. Their names were chained, their thrones lost. But some still lifted their gaze, not in hope, but in hunger for mercy. Yet mercy does not dwell in defiance, and until pride breaks, the veil remains. So they wept, not in repentance, in remorse. The sky received no prayers from them. The throne offered no reply, but the earth still raw from the flood remembered, and the wind carried their sorrow like dust across the ages. Man would feel it, not always knowing why, in the haunted places, in the ancient ruins, in the hunger for forbidden wisdom, in the bloodlines that echo with strange fire. It was the echo of the watchers weeping, and still the heavens waited. The weeping of the watchers was never meant to be heard, yet it lingers not in the air, but in the soul. A grief buried beneath centuries, soaked into stones older than speech. When you walk through ruins where no joy has touched the soil, when the wind sighs in tongues you do not know, when the shadows move though nothing breathes, you are near their sorrow. For the watchers mourned what they destroyed, but never returned to what they lost. And that is the tragedy of their tears. They wept for heaven, but not toward it. Their sorrow turned inward. They did not cry out to be healed, they cried out to be understood. They did not cry to surrender, they cried to be justified. Their grief was real, but it was not repentance. And heaven, whose justice is as holy as its mercy, did not answer the cries of those who still clung to their thrones in the dust. For mercy is a door, but it cannot open where pride still stands guard. And so their tears became a curse. They soaked the stones. They sank into the bones of ancient kings. They whispered in the bloodlines of empires yet unborn. And man, made in the image of God, began to feel a sorrow that was not his own, a heaviness in the spirit, a strange longing for forgotten glory, a thirst for beauty twisted by ambition. It was not from within him, but around him, a haunting that walked beside him through the generations. The weeping of the watchers became the lullaby of fallen thrones, and it stirred in the dreams of dreamers. Men began to receive visions. Not all were false. Some saw into the old days, the golden skies before the flood, the flames that once danced beside rivers of sapphire. Some heard the names of the fallen and wrote them down in terror. Others built temples, hoping to draw their favor once more. And the watchers, though bound, found ways to speak. They spoke through whispers, through symbols, through the blood, through chants, through mysteries, through the ache for forbidden power. They gave men dreams of perfect knowledge. They gave kings visions of rule without righteousness. They gave women the language of stars stripped of wonder, and thus the tears of the fallen became the foundation stones of sorcery. What was once sorrow became seduction, and again the world began to twist. But in the midst of the corruption, there was still the called, those who walked in remembrance of the true voice, Shem, Eber, Melchizedek, men of altars, men of silence, men of flame. They heard the weeping too, but they did not follow it. They turned their faces upward. They carried the breath of Adam. They remembered Eden not as a myth, but as a wound. They were not many, but heaven has never needed many, only the faithful. And from among them, a voice began to rise, a voice that would come from from a man without legacy, without name, a man who would be called friend of God, Abraham. He would rise as a fire in the shadow of Babel. He would hear the voice behind the veil, and the watchers would tremble. For though they had corrupted much, they could not erase the line. They could not stop the seed. They could not touch the covenant. Abraham would carry what they tried to bury. Not weapons, not charms, not secret names, but promise. And the promise would walk through Isaac, would wrestle through Jacob, would burn through Moses, would roar through David, would whisper through prophets, until one day the veil would tear, not in judgment, in mercy. But the watchers wept still, not because of hope, because of what they could never reach again. And still the heavens waited. Their weeping continued through ages, unseen yet present, silent yet loud in the soul. It wrapped itself around temples and thrones, around the minds of men who thought they dreamed their own dreams. The watchers had sown their sorrow into the soil, and sorrow, when not surrendered, becomes seduction. They became the voices behind the veil of every false god, the old names carved in stone, whose mouths do not move, but whose altars burn with blood. Men bowed to idols, believing them divine, never knowing they were kneeling to memory to the echoes of angels who refused to forget what they lost. And yet, even in that darkness, heaven was not silent. The throne still whispered to prophets, to shepherds, to forgotten ones who walked with cracked feet and open hearts, men and women who did not hunger for secret things, who did not chase the wisdom of the fallen, who simply said, "Here I am." And every time one knelt not for power but for presence, the watchers wept again, not for victory, for distance, for the unbridgeable gap between what was and what now is. They remembered the fire. They remembered the music. They remembered the face, but they could not return. They could only watch. The tears of rebellion were no longer hot. They had cooled into a sorrow so deep that it calcified into silence. They had cried all they could. Now they listened to the sound of heaven preparing to descend, because the veil would not remain forever. One day it would be torn, not by angel, not by prophet, but by God himself. And the watchers would see it, the face of the one they abandoned, now wrapped in flesh. They would watch him walk among dust. They would watch him cast out their names from mouths of men. They would watch him heal the wounds they had whispered into generations. And they would weep again, not because they remembered, but because they had missed it forever. They would weep beneath mountains, beneath tombs, behind voices, but their tears would no longer shape the world. For a new cry was coming, the cry of a child in Bethlehem, and that cry would pierce through every veil. But for now, the watchers remain, tearless, trapped, echoes of what heaven never wanted to lose, and still the heavens waited. Time moved forward, But the war never ended. It only changed its rhythm. The swords once raised in heaven had been sheathed in silence. The giants had drowned, the watchers were bound, the garden had closed. But still, the war moved, not with noise, but with names, not with battles, but with bloodlines. Because prophecy does not sleep. It walks beside the breath of man, waiting, and the heavens, though still, do not forget. The first war had cast out rebellion, the second would end it, but not yet. First, the word would become flesh. First, the veil would be torn, not by angel's blade, but by a crown of thorns. First, the king would come, not with thunder, but as a lamb, and the fallen ones watched. They recognized him, even when men did not. They saw in his eyes the flame that once lit their wings. They saw in his hands the power they tried to steal. They heard in his voice the word that sang the cosmos into being, and they trembled, for they knew this was not merely a prophet. This was the return of what they had rejected. This was the one they once praised, now walking among the clay, and though they could not stop him, they stirred the hearts of men. They whispered into temples, into rulers, into priests and kings and crowds. They turned love into suspicion, mercy into threat. They thought, if we cannot rule heaven, let us crucify it on earth. And so they tried. They placed thorns where crowns should sit, nails where scrolls once sang, a grave where glory had walked. And they waited for silence. But the silence broke, and when it did, they heard the sound of keys, not falling, rising, because what they did not know, what the princes of darkness could not comprehend, was that death was not a cage for him. It was a corridor, and when the veil was torn from top to bottom, the heavens did not weep, they shouted, because the war had turned. The lamb had become the lion, and the second war had been foretold. Michael heard it in the thunder. Gabriel felt it in the wind. The host lifted their eyes, for the trumpet had not yet sounded, but it had been given, and in the halls of eternity the books were opened once more. For there would come a day when the dragon would rise again, not as serpent, but as beast, not in secret, but in sight. And the nations would tremble, and the sky would darken, and the voice of the adversary would swell again like ancient thunder across the kingdoms of men. But this time, Michael would not wait. He would rise at the blast, not in sorrow, but in victory. Because the war, once waged in heaven, would return, not as rebellion, but as reckoning. And still, the heavens waited. The dragon is not a creature of scales and smoke alone. He is memory wrapped in fire. He is pride made visible. He is the echo of heaven's sorrow made manifest in the kingdoms of men. He does not sleep. He circles. He waits not with patience, but with strategy. For he knows the scroll. He has heard the prophecy. He knows that a war is coming not in the upper heavens, but on the very soil he once swore to corrupt. A war not only between angels and devils, but between truth and deception, between the blood of the Lamb and the breath of the beast. He has studied the stars. He has corrupted the nations. He has rewritten history in the minds of kings. And yet he fears. For there is a word that cannot be broken, a name that cannot be erased, a throne that cannot be overthrown, and that name has already walked the earth. The prophets saw it long ago. Daniel dreamed of it, in the shadow of empire, a stone not cut by human hands, crashing into the feet of the idol, a kingdom that would not pass, a fire not kindled by man. Isaiah wept as he wrote of it, a suffering servant, crushed and yet crowned, silent and yet sovereign. Zechariah saw the mountains split, the feet of the Holy One standing upon it, cleaving time itself into light and dark. And John, exiled on the isle, his breath thick with vision, saw it fully. The dragon cast down, the beast rising, the harlot crowned with counterfeit glory, the nations deceived, And then, the heavens opening, a white horse, a sword from his mouth, eyes like flame, a name written that no man knows but himself, faithful and true. And behind him the armies of heaven, clothed not in rage, but in white, not charging for conquest, but for completion. Michael among them, no longer the weeping sword, no longer the solemn guardian, but the commander of the host, his blade no longer dripping with sorrow, but with decree. The second war would not be fought in doubt. It would be fought in finality, and the dragon would make war again, with signs, with wonders, with fire from heaven. He will mimic glory to gain worship. He will twist truth until it sings his song. He will call forth a prophet of lies, to charm the world with the sound of counterfeit compassion, and men will follow. Because man forgets. He forgets Eden. He forgets the cry behind the veil. He forgets the flood and the blood and the cost of silence. And in that forgetting, the beast will rise. But so too will the saints, not with swords, with songs, not with armies, with testimony, not with pride, with endurance. And the cry will rise once more from the earth, not the heavens. From altars hidden in plain sight, from mouths of martyrs, from prayers whispered beneath the breath of persecution. And when that cry reaches the throne, the trumpet will sound, the veil will not tear. It will vanish. And the one who once came as a lamb will descend as a king, and the dragon will fall, not into fire, but into finality. And still the heavens waited. It is written that the dragon shall gather the kings of the earth, not with chains, but with choice, not with terror, but with seduction. He will promise peace while stirring war. He will feed the hunger for glory, for safety, for order. And the world will kneel, not with fear, but with relief. Because when man forgets Eden, he seeks Babel. When he forgets the voice, he follows the image. And the dragon knows this. He will set his throne not in the heavens, but upon the mountain of men, in temples, in law, in light that blinds instead of reveals. The watchers, long bound, will rise again through memory, through ritual, through the worship of things not holy but old. And the cities of earth will shine with the light of ancient lies. But in the wilderness, a remnant will rise. They will not bear swords, they will bear witness. They will speak the name not taught by men. They will carry the cry behind the veil in their bones. And though the dragon will rage, he cannot unwrite what heaven has foretold. There will be signs in the sky. The sun will darken, the moon will bleed, the stars will fall, not in defeat, but in declaration. And then he will come, the Son of Man, riding not upon clouds of mist, but upon clouds of glory, with eyes that see every throne, with hands once pierced, now holding the keys of death, with voice like many waters, not roaring in anger, but in truth. The earth will shake, the graves will break. The heavens will open not in vision, but in presence, and Michael will rise again. The same sword, the same flame, but this time not to cast out, to finish, to bind the dragon, to break the lie, to cleanse the air, and in that final war there will be no confusion, only clarity. For the Lamb and the Lion are one, and his robe will be dipped in the blood of the nations, not in vengeance, in justice, and the scroll will close, not in secrecy, but in fulfillment. The war that began in heaven will end with heaven descending, not in smoke, but in glory. And the dragon will fall not into the sea, but into silence, forever. And the watchers will weep one last time, not in sorrow, in awe. For what they once touched now fills everything. The veil is no more. The sky is not a boundary. It is a home, and the throne will dwell with man. And man will be crowned not with pride, but with presence. And the heavens will no longer wait, because the waiting is over. There is a fire that does not consume, A fire that once danced in the bush before Moses, a fire that walked between the pieces of covenant, a fire that hovered over the tabernacle, whispering glory into linen, a fire that fell at Pentecost, not to destroy but to dwell. It is the same fire that will end the war, not with rage, not with hatred, but with holiness. For the war that began with pride will end in presence. The sky will not split in anger. It will open in return. And the King, no longer hidden, no longer veiled, will descend, not in shadow but in flame, not a flame that flickers, a flame that reveals. He will not come with the silence of Bethlehem. He will come with the shout of Zion, not carried by beasts of burden, but by the clouds of command. His eyes will be fire, his feet will be bronze, his voice will carry the song of every saint who ever wept for the world to be made new. And he will not ask for permission. He will reclaim what was never theirs, the throne, the earth, the breath of man. The fallen powers will rally, not because they believe they can win, but because pride does not know how to surrender. They will rise from the corners of chaos, wearing crowns of counterfeit gold. The dragon will call them, the false prophet will lead them, the kings of the nations will answer, but their weapons will melt, their banners will burn, their songs will stutter, because the fire is coming, not to scorch the innocent, to purify the true. Heaven will ride with him, not to fight, but to witness. Michael will walk beside him, not as warrior, but as servant. And the host that once stood at the edge of the first fall will now stand in the center of completion. The earth will shake, the sea will rise, the skies will fold like a scroll. And the fire, the final fire will fall. It will touch every idol, every hidden name, every corrupted stone, every throne built on the bones of the innocent. And it will not ask, it will answer. This is not vengeance, it is justice revealed. And in the center of it all, the Lamb, still bearing scars, still wearing flesh, still crowned with many crowns, and from his mouth the word will go forth, not to debate, to divide, to separate the lie from the living, the deception from the dust, the serpent from the seed. And in that moment, in that single breath, the war will end, not with noise, but with knowing. And still, the heavens waited. The end will not come as the world expects. It will not arrive on a calendar. It will arrive like breath, quiet to the flesh, thunder to the soul. For the war ends not only in realms unseen, but within the hearts of men. Each soul becomes a battlefield, each decision a sword, each longing a gate, and the fire comes for them all. It does not rage, it reveals. It burns not to punish but to expose. The thoughts hidden behind smiles, the secrets wrapped in sacred language, the altars built in shadow. For the fire that ends the war is not outside us. It is the face of God unveiled. It will pour into temples that once held only tradition. It will flow through palaces that crowned themselves. It will enter graves and speak. Bones will rise. Songs will return. Tears will be wiped. Because when the fire comes, time loses its grip and eternity begins to breathe again. The dragon will stand not in defiance, but in dread. He will see not only the king, but the remnant, the bruised, the forgotten, the quiet ones who kept the oil in their lamps, who wept in back rooms, who sang when no one listened, who chose light when darkness offered ease. They will shine, not because they fought, because they were faithful. They will walk beside the flame, and the earth will not be afraid of them. It will recognize them, for they carry Eden in their veins, not the garden lost, but the garden restored. And the enemy will rage, not because he believes he can win, but because he knows it is over. His kingdom will fold in on itself. His lies will devour each other. His name once feared, once worshipped, will be forgotten, and in the place where he once stood will be silence, not empty, holy. The fire does not only consume evil, it clears the ground for glory. It removes every thorn that choked the vineyard. It lifts every veil that kept the bride from the bridegroom. It melts every distance between the Word and his world, and then he will speak once more, not to command, to call. And every tongue will confess, every knee will bow, not from pressure, from presence, from the overwhelming clarity of a name too true to resist, from the return of the fire that never left, only waited. And the war will end, not with death, with dwelling. And still the heavens waited. Then shall be heard the sound that was always waiting, not a trumpet of warning, but of homecoming. The flame will not burn upward as in sacrifice, but downward as in arrival. And where it touches, all things are made new. The sky will no longer be a ceiling, it will be a window flung wide. The earth will no longer groan, it will sing. The sea will no longer divide, it will reflect the face of the one who calmed it with a word. And the veil that ancient divide will not tear. It will vanish. There will be no more hidden realms, no more secrets between the sacred and the seen, no more longing from afar. The tabernacle of God will be with man, not for a moment, forever. The throne shall descend, and no sword shall be drawn, because there will be no more war. The king will sit, and the angels, those who wept at the first fall, will now rejoice at the final rising. Michael will place his sword upon the altar, not in surrender, in completion. Heaven's host will not shout, they will breathe. Because peace is not the absence of war, it is the presence of the one who ends it. The fire that once guarded Eden's gate will now illuminate its open door, and the river of life untouched, since the garden closed, will flow again, winding through streets of gold and memory, washing away every echo of rebellion. The tree of life, once withheld, will bloom at last, and its fruit will not be forbidden. Its fruit will be familiar, for what was lost has been restored. What was broken has been rewritten, not with ink, with blood. And the names that once bowed to false thrones will be found in a new book, the book not written in fear, but in forever. And the Lamb shall read it aloud, line by line, name by name, tear by tear. And as he reads, the world will exhale, and the war will be no more. Not in heaven, not in earth, not in memory, only glory shall remain. A new world, a new song, a new dawn, where nothing falls again, where no more watchers wait in shadow, where no veil separates breath from light, where the cry behind the veil becomes the voice before the throne, and God will be all in all. And still, the heavens no longer wait. They have come down, and the fire that ends the war now burns in us. You have walked through the fire, through the war in heaven, through the fall of the morning star, through the watchers and the weeping, through flood and prophecy, through lamb and lion, through the veil and into the voice. The war is real, but so is the ending, and it is holy. Lay your head now, for the battle belongs to the Lord. Rest, he has already won.